In the corporate world, if you work really hard and you believe that people are going to be taking care of you, I don't think that's true.
What are some of those lessons that you've seen not only gets you excited about where the future could be, but how can we be preparing this next generation for this future that's changing super fast?
Get in the game. When you're in the game, you can see the patterns of the game. You can see how the patterns develop. You can start predicting what the future is going to be. We have this cultural DNA that we need to examine and adapt to corporate life.
You're the first Mexican-born vice president in this multinational, multi-billion-dollar company.
And that got me thinking that, I invested a lot in diversity. When you look at my senior staff, look at all the GMs, half of them at all times were females.
Man, opening up doors for others and making sure not only you're going through, but you're reaching back and you're pulling others along. Man, it matters today more than ever. So thank you, sir, for that reminder. Welcome back to the Future Human Experience. I am so excited to not only be here with a fellow friend, a mentor, an extended family member of the Rodriguez family, Jose Avalos. Bienvenido. Thank you for coming to the Future Human Experience.
Erica, it's a big privilege for me. I don't know whether I should be really happy or I should cry, but it's special. It's special to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jose. Well, we've gotten to know each other for some time now, but what got me really excited about you coming onto this podcast is not only because of the work that this podcast has been leading over the last few years, which is really talking about that even though the future is becoming more digitized, it gives us the opportunity to be more human. A lot of that I learned by working with you and working with some amazing leaders in the tech sector. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit more about your background, your story on how you came to be one of the most predominant leaders in the tech sector over the last few decades.
Well, it started with my parents. Yeah. I was born in Mexico in a small city, very old city, La Barca, Jalisco. And Jalisco is quite an important state in Mexico because a lot of traditions come from Jalisco, right? Tequila, mariachi, they come from Jalisco. So very proud of that. My family immigrated to Chicago in 1978. So I started high school there. We lived in a low-income immigrant, mostly Mexican neighborhood, and I went to high school there. I did really good in math and in science. My English was very poor because all the channels on television were in Spanish. Yeah. Everybody in the grocery store, in the tortilleria, they all spoke Spanish. My classes in high school were in Spanish. So it was difficult for me to get into a really good college, but I came across Dean Parker at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and he took a chance on me. He enrolled me on a special program for diverse candidates and got me into the engineering school. Wow. I started in chemical engineering. I didn't really like it. Then I tried nuclear. I didn't really like it. Then I tried electrical engineering, and I really like electrical engineering. Cool. The answer was always 0 or 1. So, I like that a lot. Then after I finished college there, I moved to Austin, Texas. I worked there for 2 years at Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, as a product engineer. Then I moved to Phoenix, and I was a product engineer at Intel. It was clear to me in the late 80s that Intel was going to be a dominant force in technology and in changing society with technology. And so I moved there, and that became true. During different times in the 90s, Intel was the most valuable company in the world. So it was exciting to build a career there. I started as a product engineer. I got my master's in electrical engineering at ASU while I was working at Intel. And the first 12 years, I worked in engineering roles with increasing responsibility. I started as a product engineer, became a supervisor, became a manager, mid-level manager, then director of engineering. And then after 12 years, I transitioned to business. And I really focused on starting new businesses for Intel. And then in 2009, I founded a business for them that became very successful, the digital signage business, which evolved into visual solutions. And the first year we did $18 million. And by the time I retired 12 years later in 2021, we were influenced over $1 billion of revenue with very good margins. So that was quite an accomplishment for my team and for myself and for my mentors and sponsors. Yeah. Then when I retired from Intel, I had the opportunity to spin off a business from Intel, a business that was being incubated in my organization that focused on IoT infrastructure for smart cities. And I was the CEO there for 2 years. That was quite successful. I got the company to be profitable, and we did over 8,500 IoT deployments in Latin America. And now I transitioned out of that a couple of years back, and now I sit on a couple of high-tech startup boards, and I'm pretty much retired, you can say.
That's cool. But not only you're retired, but you're retired and sharing your lessons with everyone, right? Sharing your lessons on not only your journey, the impact that you've made, but also what you see, what could be coming, and how you're preparing that next generation for what's coming. With that said, Jose, what are some of those lessons that you've seen over the years in this world, right? We're in this AI era today that, even though it might be the most culturally relevant term over the last 24 months, but you were speaking about this probably 10 years ago in the tech sector, right? We were building businesses around this too. What are some of the things that not only gets you excited about where the future could be, but how can we be preparing this next generation for this future that's changing super fast?
You know, my advice, specifically to Hispanics, right? Yes. Because there's not a lot of Hispanic senior leaders in high tech. Yeah. There's a lot more now than there used to be, but specifically my messages to Hispanics is the following. Get in the game. That's the message. So let me explain what I mean by that. You know, psychologists say that about 50% of who you are is based on the DNA, the genes that you get from your parents. Another 25% is your environment, right? Which I call your family culture, or your culture DNA, your family DNA. And then the other 25% is your habits, right? So in that 20% of your family and culture DNA, there are messages that your parents give to you that get embedded in you. And I had a couple that really helped me in my career from my parents, especially for my mother. The first one was that education is a big differentiator. And it certainly has been a big differentiator in my life. You know, I went to high school in a low-income immigrant neighborhood in Chicago, and as we were talking a little bit earlier, I became the first Mexican-born vice president at Intel Corporation, one of the largest corporations for high technology in the world, right? So education is key. It's a big differentiator in the quality of your life. The second thing that they said to me is that if you work hard, good things will happen to you. If you work hard, people will take care of you, you know? And I really believe that. Yeah. And that helps you to a certain extent. You get to a certain level where it stops helping you. And that's where my comment about getting into the game becomes relevant. So let me explain. Certainly, there's no replacement for hard work. It doesn't matter if you're in sports or in technology or in sales. Working hard is the basis to success, right? But in the corporate world, if you work really hard and you believe that people are going to be taking care of you, I don't think that's true. I don't think that always happens. Yeah. And let me give you some specific examples. I remember when I first went to a reorganization of work, you know, my manager came to me and said, hey, we're going to do a reorganization. And I said, that's great. You know, and then I started thinking, I said, you know, if I work hard, people are going to take care of me. I got to work really hard, you know. And then the reorganization came about, and I didn't get the position that I wanted, and it wasn't what I wanted, right? I wasn't in the game. The next time my manager said I wanted to reorganize, I immediately started asking questions. Well, you know, what problems do you want to solve with the organization? You know, why do you see our vision? What do we need to do? Where is the industry? Where are the needs of consumers moving to that we need to intercept? And then after my boss explained all of that, then I asked, you know, can I provide some solutions? Can I be part of the team that helps you define the new organization? I was in the game. Yes. I was seeing the opportunities and materializing on the opportunities. I'll give you a sports analogy because I know you love soccer, and I love soccer too, but I'll give you a soccer analogy. You know, if you sit in the bench, if you're part of the team and you sit in the bench, you spend your entire time thinking about how do I get into the game, right? You start looking at your nutrition, at your training habits, you see what your peers do. You're trying to get into the team, into the starting lineup. But when you're in the game, it's completely different. Because when you're in the game, you can see the patterns of the game, you can see how the patterns develop, you can start predicting what the future is gonna be and how you can intercept that future. You know, what can you do for yourself, you know, with your nutrition, with your training, with your mental health to intercept those opportunities. And that's what I call being in the game. So as a Hispanic, you know, coming from Hispanic culture where people tell me work really hard and things will happen for you, that helps you. That helps a lot. But you have to work smart. You have to be in the game. So that's my message. You know, we have this cultural DNA that we need to examine and adapt to corporate life and the corporate environment.
Jose, I mean, there's so much there to unpack, but one of the things I want to unpack first is you highlighting the fact that, and you just slightly mentioned it, but it is a big deal. You're the first Mexican-born vice president in this multinational, multi-billion-dollar company. And I remember the first time we started working together, and you were introduced this way. And I heard it a few times, and I remember thinking, like, man, is it that big a deal? Like, can we just say that, yeah, he's one of the first vice president, you know, executives. Why is it a big deal he was Mexican-born? And it was when we had an event in Mexico one time, and they introduced you that way. And I remember speaking to those employees afterwards. They said, Eric, this is a big deal. This is a big deal because now we see ourselves in that journey, right? How many times do we see either second generation or first generation, right, Americans having these opportunities? It was a big deal for you opening up that doors for foreign-born leaders and individual contributors. With that said, now, Jose, I mean, your career has developed into this new stage of your life. Your family has even grown over the last few years, which is wonderful to see. How do you look back at those moments now of you being the first in so many of these rooms? What type of reflection have you had from a personal level, knowing that all of us now, we get to not only look up to you, but get to follow some of those footsteps as well?
Certainly, it was very meaningful to me, right? I felt a great sense of pride, and I was very proud to be the first Mexican-born appointed vice president at Intel, you know, in a history of 50 years. So it was a big deal, and I understood that it was a big deal. But now looking back, I think that it's more important the impact that it had on other people, that it had on the people that love me, because it really reinforced all the work my parents did. It really reinforced all the work that my teachers, my mentors, my sponsors, the people that helped me, my teams, you know, it really reinforced their belief in me. And that was important. But as you said, it was also a beacon of what can be done for other people. You know, there was this person in finance at Intel, a young finance executive from, or wanted to be an executive at the time from New York. And when he left the company, he said to me, you know, you really inspire me. You know, I never thought that I could be the CFO of $1 billion company. And now I'm going to be the CFO of a billion company because I saw you do it. And now I know I can do it. You know, I grew up in a family of bakers. My parents were bakers. My grandparents were bakers. My uncles were bakers. We were all bakers. Yeah. But I wanted to be the CFO of a $1 billion company. Yeah. And cool. It wasn't within my framework of what can be accomplished until I saw you become a vice president and I saw your work. And I said, you know what? I can do it. Yeah. And he did it. He did it. Awesome. He is CFO of a $1 billion company today. I just ran into him a few weeks back, and cool. He mentioned this to me. So the summary is I feel a sense of pride. I'm very proud of it. It's a key accomplishment, but for me, it's more important what it did to reinforce the work that my parents and my family did and the people that love me, and the impact that it had on the people around me, that helped them understand that they also can be that and can be much more.
Yeah.
And we hope that the next generation does a lot more than we did.
Yeah. And Jose, that's a reminder, right, of our audience as they're navigating change in their careers or navigating, hey, what could be next? I remember vividly, what brought us together was your organization, but the role that I had was the chief of staff role, and this was a very popular role in the corporation, but it was also very competitive. It was a very competitive role to get into, just to get an interview for some of these roles, right? Because they didn't come a lot, right? And I remember someone giving me this guidance a few years earlier, right, saying, hey, if you're ever going to become a chief of staff, be very selective with who you're going to become a chief of staff for. Like, you don't just randomly search for a role and say, hey, go and pick it. Be very intentional and strategic, right? Get in the game with the right person in that role that you want to grow into. And I remember us having had already a working relationship and knowing you and your brand and what you stood for. But more importantly, I knew that you were a leader that not only led an organization, you opened doors for others. And for me, that was very important as I was growing into my career inside of Intel. And so when I saw that opportunity to work for you at that time, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the individual and the executive that I want to, connect with, work with, learn from, because it's not only one thing to open doors for your businesses and for the growth of the company, it's how do you bring others along with you as well. And I think not only you being that beacon for so many of us in the community, you took that to heart. And I don't know, Jose, if you want to share the story a little bit more about how I ended up joining your team. But I recall you sharing with me later on privately saying, like, wow, I don't think Eric's going to come to this team. Like, he's a good guy. He's cool. But this is a very competitive role. Do you remember that experience of like that initial thought about me joining your team? And maybe you didn't think I was going to be going that far in the process.
Yeah, but I believed in you, Eric.
I know you believed in me. I think it was more like, I don't know if everyone else is going to see what you saw in me, I guess. Maybe
you were a little hesitant, but yeah. I believed in you. And, there was a sense of curiosity. Yes. And, you really value learning. And I really looked at you and your values, high integrity, high honesty. So, all the right pointers were there for me. And now you get into a topic of legacy.
Yes.
Which is it's kind of interesting to look back and think about legacy. I'm going to share a little bit about how please. I feel about my own legacy. For the longest time, I thought that building this big business at Intel was my legacy. I tried building a number of businesses, and I would get them to about $50 to $100 million a year with very nice margins. But that's not what Intel wanted. Intel was a $60 billion company. They wanted billion-dollar businesses. And I remember my leadership saying to me, like, yeah, that's a nice business, but why don't you let somebody else run it? Because we don't really see you getting to $1 billion. We want you to focus on the next thing that is going to be $1 billion. So when I got into digital signage first, and we did $18 million the first year, and then within a few years, we're doing hundreds of millions of dollars. And then I made some strategic moves to scale the business by not only selling digital signage solutions, but integrating digital signage into other applications and scaling the business. And then we got to be over $1 billion with super high margins, right? With very little people. I think our team was in the range of 25 to 40 people at all time, and driving hundreds and hundreds of millions of profit for the company. So I firmly believe that was my legacy. So when I was leaving, I had the opportunity to talk to Tom Lange. And Tom Lange at the time, the senior vice president running all of IoT for Intel. And I was explaining to him what I thought my legacy was. And, Tom is a pretty deep guy. He thinks about things, and he's very smart. And he said to me, he said, Jose, that's not your legacy. He said, your legacy is the hundreds of businesses that the people that you coach, that you mentor, that you sponsor are going to start, and you're not even going to know about them. And that got me thinking that, I invested a lot in diversity. When you look at my senior staff, look at all the GMs, half of them at all times were females. And so I was very careful about diversity, and I invested in Hispanics. It was interesting note. It was very interesting to some of my peers that my chief of staffs were all Hispanics. Yeah. And one of them pointed it out to me one time and said, Jose, isn't it funny that all your chief of staffs are Hispanic? And I said, no. I said, is it funny to you that our staff is all white executives all the time? Yeah. No. Yeah. Right? So I wanted to move the needle. Yeah. I wanted to make a difference. And so I looked for people that had interest in advancing themselves. They had good values, good integrity, they were honest, they were trusting. And I saw that in you, Eric. And I saw great potential for growth. And I wanted to bring in people into the team, not only that were going to contribute positively to the organization and to the company, but they were going to grow and we're going to take on greater responsibility and create those businesses that I will never know about.
Yeah. I love that. There's this really interesting saying in Hamilton, the musical, which I know you have spoken about in our travels too. There's a saying in the musical where he says, what is a legacy? Legacy is planting seeds in a garden you don't get to see, right? It's this beautiful moment that you're recognizing that, even this podcast itself, Jose, is part of your legacy, right? That not only you gave myself guidance and so many others about being much more intentional with what we cared about. You also gave me an opportunity to be in one of the largest stages that I ever spoke at Intel. When I first became your chief of staff, I spoke at this conference with all these executives, and you were like, you got this, right? Mm-hmm. Tom Lanch was one of the sponsors there that day too, and to this day he reminds me of that moment. And you never know when you have a chance to open doors for others. And so my message to the audience today, if you're listening to this, you don't need to be the first executive to open doors. You could open up doors today for others, right? In the rooms that you're in. And that's where in this future of work that we've been building that's constantly changing, that the game is changing, going back to that initial analogy, man, opening up doors for others and making sure not only you're going through, but you're reaching back and you're pulling others along, man, it matters today more than ever. So thank you, sir, for that reminder on this journey. So Jose, we've spoken about legacy, we've spoken about your story, we've spoken about the impact, but let's go back to that. Let's unwrap a little bit more in your career. What have been some of those inflection points in your career that not only drive you to the work that you do today, but are important lessons that, looking back, are important for all of us to know to make sure we're moving forward in a certain way as well?
Some of them, I had a number of inflection points in my career that really accelerated my development and my impact. And a lot of them were driven by education. So I'll go back to one in my career. After I came to Intel, Intel had a program where they would sponsor your MBA or your master's in engineering, and I decided to get a master's in electrical engineering at ASU. So I started the master's, and I got through most of it. I think I still needed like 3 classes and a thesis. And by this time, I had already been promoted to a mid-level engineering manager. So I felt like, man, do I really need a master's? So I went back and talked to my advisor, to Decade Schroeder. And I said, Dr. Schroeder, I said, I think I'm going to stop with the master's. He said, why? And I said, well, because, deriving Maxwell's equations is just not going to be important to the work that I'm doing now. And he looked at me, he said, well, you believe in education? I said, yeah, I believe in education. He says, I'll cut a deal with you. And I said, what is that? He says, you take 2 classes instead of a thesis, and you pass the PhD entrance exam, and you finish the other 3 classes, and you can take the classes in any engineering college, but it has to be an engineering college or the university. So take 5 classes total in any engineering college and pass the PhD entrance exam, and I will give you the degree. So I did that. I went and took management of technology, operating systems, neural networks, parallel computing, in areas that I have never touched on in engineering, right? My education was really focused on solid state devices. And And then I took the PhD entrance exam and I passed. I think that the semester that I took it, I had the second highest score. So I did know how to derive Maxwell's equations. But what that did for me, Eric, the inflection point was that I learned something about myself. I learned that I could learn anything in engineering. It didn't matter if I had gone to school or not for it. I could learn it and I could practice it. And then soon after that, I was presented with an opportunity from my manager to go, in addition to my product engineering role as an engineering manager, to go be the information systems manager for one of the test facilities at Intel. And I didn't even blink an eye. I took it. And I went and hired the right people. I hired a leader that wasn't ready to be a leader yet, but really knew the technology. And she hired a bunch of really competent people. And I developed her over 2 to 3 years. And then I promoted her into the role and moved her back into manufacturing operations. But that allowed me to show my leadership that I wasn't just a product engineering manager, that I could do other things. So once I did that, I went back to my management. I said, look, I'm ready for more responsibility, but I want to be focused on the core of the business, not on manufacturing at this time. And so that was an inflection point, right? Learning that you can learn anything and do anything. That's very powerful because you don't doubt yourself when you're presented with opportunities. You just take on them.
And today you could learn anything out of something in your pocket, basically, right? We have the technology today. You and I, we always share resources as well, right? Of something that either you've learned or I've learned. Our capability of learning something today is greater than ever compared to at the times that we had to either look for expertise in a certain space or spend money to get into those rooms with that expertise. Today, that expertise is being much more democratized. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's getting much more accessible.
And we haven't talked about HBS. We should talk about HBS.
Yes, and
that was also an inflection point for me.
Yeah. So let's just give the context. This is Harvard Business School. This is an opportunity you had a chance to go in your career. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I'll give you the context. Yes. I was at a point in my career where I was an executive, but I wasn't a corporate executive yet, right? I was in a general management leadership type of position. And I felt like I was stuck. So I went to HR and I said, hey, I need help. I need a mentor that sits on the executive staff of the company, right? And I figure if I can get a mentor, maybe I can convince him or her to be my sponsor too, right? It took a long time. I think it took like 6 months to a year before one was assigned to me, but finally the head of diversity for the company was able to take in my bio and my resume to the CEO and said, hey, Paul Rollini was our CEO at the time. Paul, can you assign a mentor out of executive staff for Jose? So he read all my stuff and says, I'll do it. So here I am. I asked for help and I got assigned the CEO of the company to be my mentor. So I would meet with him once a quarter for an hour. We would have lunch for half an hour. And then we take the other half an hour and I spend 15 minutes talking to him about my business. And then the other 15 minutes about the challenges that I was having with my business and about my own development plan and the things that I was focusing on to improve my effectiveness for the company. And I got his coaching. So after Digital Signage Visual Solutions, the business that I had founded, started generating hundreds of millions of dollars, he said to me, look, you obviously had great business acumen, but you don't have formal business education. So he asked me to go do the executive MBA program at Stanford. But at the time, I was a single parent. And my kids were teenagers, and I just felt like being away for 3 months at a time was going to be very impactful to them. So it was not the right program for me. So I started looking at different programs, and Harvard had the general management program, which was kind of like a mini MBA. Not a Harvard MBA, because I don't want to take away from the people that actually go and sit there in school for 2 years and do a lot of hard work. But it was like a 5-month program. And so I went and did that. And I could do some modules from home and some modules at the school. So it gave me more flexibility. Yeah. So I went and sold Paul on that, and he sent me to Harvard.
That's cool.
And it was an inflection point for me because it changed who I was or how I approached the business. Until then, my approach was, take care of my team, take care of my business, take care of me. And the
executive profiles that Intel had done on me said that I was really good at managing up and I was really good at managing down, but I was not that great at managing sideways, right? And clearly, I needed a different perspective, but I didn't know how to change it. And that message had been repeated a couple of years in a row. But after I came back from Harvard, I started focusing not on making myself or my business or my team successful, but on making the company successful. So instead of competing with my peers for resources, I would go to them and say, hey, what do you need? How can we help you be successful? And I changed as a person, and people notice. And once people noticed that my interest was making the company successful and not making my business or my team or myself successful, things changed. And things really started happening for me. And the business grew really fast. I was able to develop more people. So that was quite an inflection point because it really accelerated my career.
And so the lesson there is having an opportunity today to, even though your measurement might be within these boundary conditions, those are, to a certain extent, just arbitrary, right? Your boundary conditions, even though they were there, you said that those don't limit me. Those don't limit to how I work or how the impact I want to make. I need to think much bigger than that. And so you basically took control of those boundary points and expanded them. You started thinking like a CEO, and that is awesome. I never heard that version, because I got to meet with you already when you were like the super collaborator of the company. That's cool. With that, Jose, too, one of the special things that we like to do with our guests that come along is ask them to come up with a surprise question. You and I have known each other very well over the last few years, so I'm really interested to see what question you might have for me today with the audience that we have today, Jose. So I'm ready for your question, Jose.
Psychologists say that there are 4 things that really drive your peace and your happiness as a person. And, your faith, your family, your relationships with your friends, and your work. And obviously, you're a great family guy. You have an amazing wife. She makes the best chiles rellenos in the world, other than my mom. I know you clarify that, because she might see this. And it's true. Yeah. But she makes great chile rellenos. Your kids are great kids. I met your parents. They're great people. And you're a high integrity, high honesty, high trust person. Tell me about that family DNA. What was it that your parents did with you and your siblings to really make you be high moral, high integrity, high honesty, high trusting, loving family people?
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, that's super kind of you to say that. I think reflecting back on my life, and this is, I've always looked at this like a learning opportunity. One of the things that I tried to do with not only my kids, but I reflect back on my parents too, is just, there's also some sense of grace in this work too, right? Like as parents, you always just try to do your best, right? Like you want to think your kids think that you're like the coolest and the best of all time, but eventually they realize that we're just as flawed as any other human being. And I think eventually all the kids recognize that in our parents, and I think I got to recognize that in my parents. But then I also had a chance to just say, hey, you know what? It's okay. Like, it's okay. They did the best they could. And I think when I recognized that, it gave me also that peace of mind that when I become a parent, I'm just going to try to do the best I can. And when I become a husband, I'm going to just be the best husband I could possibly can. I can't be perfect, but I'll try to be the best I can. And I think that combined with the experiences that they did on just moving us from Houston to Ecuador and then moving us back, like, if I were just to tell that story at a high level, it's like, no, man, like, why would you do that to families? Like, that's traumatic. That's messed up. Or you could look at it like, man, they were just doing the best they could at the moment that they had, right? They had this sick, my younger brother was very sick. That's why they did it, right? They were trying to show us the experience in Ecuador, which they realized was very different than the experience that we had in the United States. They were doing the best they could. And the same thing when we moved back, right? They had lost everything. Basically all their life savings was gone. But I could have taken all my time and said, what did y'all just do? Everything my dad worked for by the age of 50 was gone. Instead, we decided to focus on, hey, let's just restart. And so I think that has helped me over the last few years, even as I'm starting this business, right? Is saying, hey, I'm not gonna be the perfect podcaster, I'm not gonna be the perfect speaker, but darn, I'm gonna do the best I can. And if I could do the best I can to put myself out there, put in the work, put myself in the game, I do believe good things will happen. And so I think I reflect back on that, is just having that perspective on reflecting not only on my parents doing the best they can, but also reflecting that myself as a human being. I'm also a work in progress. I'm always going to be a work in progress.
You know, something really interesting that you said is the fact that you grew up into cultures. And I think that's an asset.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it doesn't feel good because I go to Mexico and people say, hey, you speak with an American accent. And then I'm here and people say, hey, you have a really strong Mexican accent. So you don't feel like you're from there or here, or, you know, but I know in business, it really helped me because it helped me understand diversity. It helped me value different cultures, value diversity, and knowing that there's more than one way to solve a problem. So when we expanded our business internationally and we did businesses in over 50 countries with our business, it was easier for us to see local trends, understand what the needs of the consumer were in that specific geography or that specific country or that specific city, and that other people might not be able to see. So I sometimes growing up in dual cultures is very beneficial in business because you value diversity, you value a different way of doing things, and you can see things that other people cannot see.
Yeah. No, there's absolutely been a superpower that I'm very grateful for. That absolutely, as you're going through it, as you're living through it, you're like, what is happening? This is not cool, right? But as you start growing up and you reflect back on those experiences, oh my God, yeah, I would not change that at all. If anything, I'm trying to figure out how to create those experiences for my children now, right? How do you create those multicultural experiences for them? With that said, Jose, again, it's been an honor to have you here. Thank you for all the work that not only you have done in your career, but you continue to do. You continue to support us. All those seeds that you've planted over the years, we're starting to grow into these little plants today. But just thank you. My career would not be where it's at today if it wasn't for you. I'm just incredibly grateful for not only you being at the time that you were in my life, for my family, for my career. Thank you for supporting me in this work that I get to do today, for being that inspiration for this. Again, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's an honor to have you. Jose Avalos, thank you for being in the Future Human Experience.
Thank you, Eric. The admiration is mutual. Thank you for everything.
Hey everyone, this is Eric, the host of the Future Human Experience. The reason why this podcast was created was to be a platform for others to really bring these conversations to life. So if you're enjoying this content, please like and subscribe. It will really help our channel and expose these ideas for others. Thank you.